This is part 6 of Godlesspanther's Satanic Panic series. I left off in part 5 with Bob Larson. Like David Newbill, Larson is one of those crackpots whose worldview is so distorted and bizarre that his material can be mistaken for parody. On the heels of Newbill's anti-rock tirade, Larson wrote Rock and Roll, the Devil's Diversion. It was published in 1967. According to the Witchfox article on Larson, the tone is similar to Newbill's, but instead of communism, Larson blamed Satan for the creation of rock and roll. And over the years, he authored 10 books just to prove that point. Larson's take on the situation became more popular. I see a couple of reasons for this. One is the idea of the devil's music was already in place for a long time before the Cold War, Red Scare, McCarthyism paranoia. In this regard, Larson latched on to an older, perhaps more entrenched belief that the Christian right segment of the population held. Then, let's compare stories. Newbill presented the imagination with Google-eyed, frazzled-haired mad scientists in dark Russian laboratories composing the new smash hit for American radio play. Pretty good, but dry in comparison to the Dark Lord possessing the souls of rock and roll musicians, tempting them with fame and fortune in exchange for their immortal souls and leading them down the self-destructive path of sin, debauchery, decadence, and perversion. And under the direction of Satan, these musicians make it their goal to take the American youth down the same path. Not the communist flag, but the mark of the beast would rise above the nation. Larson concocted a much juicier scenario. Newbill provided the framework, Larson provided the story, but it was John Lennon who gave them the fuel to make it take off. An English journalist, Maureen Cleave, conducted an interview with John Lennon for the London Evening Standard. That was published March 4th, 1966. Then the following August, an issue of Datebook, a now defunct American teen magazine, republished a portion of Cleave's interview in which Lennon stated the famous words, "More popular than Jesus," referring to the Beatles. A quote from the interview, "I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity," was printed on the cover of that magazine. During the 5 months between the release of the newspaper article in England and the publication of Datebook in the United States, there was no public mention of Lennon's remarks. Within some sectors of the United States, mostly the Southern Bible Belt community, there was an extreme outrage that led to the public burning of Beatles records and other related items. Some radio stations ceased airplay of Beatles records, and some stores stopped carrying that product. One of the primary groups that staged protests against the Beatles in 1966 was the Ku Klux Klan. Again, the racist connection. Bob Larson capitalized on the reactionary attitude of the Christian right and their ability to scapegoat real people and target them with real hatred and violence based on delusional thought process. Exactly the witch hunt mentality of the medieval crusaders that is carried on through to contemporary society, and the same ideology that Satanic Panic was based on. Manufactured issues. As we saw with the progression of the satanic cult activity, starting with Mike Warnke and the Satan Seller, then Michelle Remembers and a barrage of copycats enabling the Christian right ideology to spill over into mainstream culture. Larson laid the foundation for others to follow. The Peters brothers from St. Paul, Minnesota, traveled around the United States and staged dramatic events where teenagers were encouraged to bring forth their record collections and toss the offending materials into the flames of a bonfire in the name of Jesus. Along with the Peters brothers, authors such as Jacob Aranza and Jeff Godwin also made an impact with tales of the evils of rock and roll. There is no doubt about the connection between the anti-rock crusade and racism. Newbill, Larson, Peters brothers, etc. all made reference to rock and roll containing a, quote, jungle beat or, quote, voodoo rhythm that was imported from Africa. The Peters were quoted from one of their shows that drug addiction was okay in the ghettos, but not in white bread America. This says something about the audience that they were aiming their bullshit toward. Here is where I get back into the Satanic Panic era and the significance of the anti-rock movement. There were several urban legends that originated with the anti-rock crusade. One of them was that houseplants had an increased growth rate when exposed to classical music, but when hard rock was played consistently, the poor thing shriveled up and died. Another one, which Larson stated, was that people who attended hard rock concerts would lay raw eggs on the stage, and by the end of the concert, the eggs would be hard-boiled, cooked by the intensity of the high-volume music. As obviously absurd as these claims are, actual experiments have been conducted to verify that they are just as stupid as they sound. Damn. I was hoping that I could take 4 eggs to a country western concert and end up with a Denver omelet at the end of the show. The most significant rumor that sprang up from these freaks in terms of satanic panic was something that was called backward masking. This meant that certain records, when played backwards, revealed a message that subconsciously influence the listener toward Satan worship. Is it possible that anybody could believe such a ridiculous thing to be true? Some people did. A lot of people. An embarrassingly large number of people. Backward masking is based on the subliminal message concept. This is something that was thoroughly debunked long before the mid. The subliminal message concept is that a message could be presented to the audience in a way that the subject does not consciously perceive that message, but the subconscious mind does, and this influences the person's behavior. In 1957, James Vickery, a movie theater owner, claimed that he increased the sale of Coke and popcorn significantly by flashing the messages "drink Coke" and "eat popcorn" for a fraction of a second. Too quick for the audience to see the message, but it placed the idea in their minds. He actually sold this kind of advertising to business owners. After no one else was able to replicate the dramatic increase in sales, James Vickery admitted that his bold claims were not true. Many experiments have been conducted with exposing people to subliminal messages. These experiments have consistently shown the method to be ineffective, but folks still believe that such messages are being used by politicians, advertisers, and even rock musicians. The idea behind backward masking is that some song lyrics have a distinct message when played backwards. When the listener hears the song forwards, their subconscious picks up the backward message that, in the case of rock music, is usually something about Satan. This device is usually divided into 2 categories. Intentional, where a piece of backward recording is deliberately placed in a song for effect, such as can be heard in Darling Nikki by Prince and Rain by the Beatles. The second type is unintentional backward masking. Sometimes lyrics played backwards seem to contain words or sentences in English. There are several famous examples of this. The most well known is perhaps Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven.